So you've decided to be a therapy client. Congratulations. Here's what you need to know. Hi, I'm Andrew Rodriguez, and welcome to Psycho Bible, babbling about psychology and theology. So, maybe you're starting therapy for the first time ever, or maybe you've seen a bunch of therapists in the past, and some experiences have been good, some have been not so good, and maybe some of that has been the fault of your therapist. Maybe they just weren't a good fit for you. Maybe they just weren't as experienced in the area in which you're looking for help in. Maybe they just used a therapy approach that just didn't fit your goals or your values or your level of severity of the issue you're dealing with. And that all could be possible. But I also wonder if maybe there's some ways that you contributed to some struggles in therapy in the past by not knowing the best way to approach therapy. Or if you're brand new to therapy, perhaps you're a little bit confused about, well, what should I expect out of therapy? What should it be like? So I've been wanting to make this video for some time to be a bit of a primer or a crash course in how to be a client and get the most out of your therapy experience. So I'm taking some of the things I've told clients over the years in our first few sessions and just trying to compile it, condense it, and present it to you as hopefully a way to orient you to therapy. So like this is your orientation video. So first, before we go any further, we need to be clear on what counseling is for. If you've never done counseling before, or maybe you've had some therapy where, let's be honest, you might have been actually seeing a really good therapist, where all you do is pretty much go and talk and vent and maybe complain about your life, your problems, or this is the depiction of counseling that you've seen in media or movies or TV where someone just talks to someone for a while and you just think of counseling as just talking. Well, sorry to say you've gotten the wrong picture of what good therapy is. I'm not going to say that is not accurate for certain types of approaches or certain therapists that are out there. I'm a bit critical of my colleagues in my own field. There's a lot of therapists who may phone it in, or they really don't have the level of insight that they should have to be a therapist, or the life experience, or the wisdom necessary to be a good therapist. So, yeah, some of them might actually counsel in a way that is really not helpful for people. In fact, there's been outcome studies that they've done on therapy and shown that about 30% of counseling is actually helpful. And so that means about 70% of the time you go to a therapist, you're not going to receive any benefit. Well, that's not good. So there's not always good therapy out there. But let's say hopefully you do get a therapist who does take it serious, who has a little more knowledge and training, and you want to get the most out of that experience. And maybe you got someone who isn't going to be so good, and you want to weed that person out right away. So we need to be clear, or you need to be clear at least as the client, on what the purpose of counseling is. And it's not to vent. Now, there may be sessions in which you just need to vent, and that's okay, if that's more the rare occasion, more the exception to the norm. And there may be times where you just need to sort of reflect and ponder. Understandable. There's always an exception to what should be the normal session. But we have to have an understanding that ultimately, therapy is not about just venting about your problems, about just sort of meandering through topics and talking about the problem of the week, coming there and talking about, well, today my husband did this, or, oh, my kids got on my nerves this week, and here's all the ways that they got on my nerves, and the problems you have with everyone else in your life, or just ruminating on your particular shortcomings and venting about it. And also, newsflash, therapy is not about affirming every idea that you have about yourself or about the way the world works. It's not putting a rubber stamp of approval on the way you view things. It's just not what therapy is. So, what is therapy? Good therapy, real authentic therapy. As I've often said in other videos, true therapy is about gaining insight and healing. More specifically, especially if you've watched my recent videos on transformational change, therapy is about uncovering implicit learning. Now, this is old school. If you go back to Freud and Jung, they make it quite clear that psychotherapy is about making the unconscious conscious. And by unconscious, simply mean how you've learned things at an implicit level, meaning at an emotional level from experience. And so we need to make these types of learnings, these schemas, explicit. Make the implicit explicit, so we can gain insight into the dynamics that are actually dictating how we live. Newsflash, you are not fully conscious of all the reasons why you do what you do. None of us are. It's our emotional part of ourselves. It's our unconscious that actually dictates most of the decisions we make. So I've mentioned this in previous videos, that we often think that we're like a rider on an elephant, and the rider thinks he's the one calling the shots. And the rider really represents the small part of your rational mind that reasons and thinks logically and makes choices consciously. And that part of you thinks that's the part of you that is really in charge of your whole life, or at least your decisions. But really it's the elephant, your whole emotional life, your things that you've learned implicitly through experience, through conditioning. That's really what determines the course that you're on. Now, that doesn't mean you can't do anything about it, and that's what therapy is for. But first you need to face that reality, that your decisions are primarily determined by your emotions. And that might seem irrational, and it might seem haphazard or maybe even insulting to hear that. But that's the truth. But just because it's learned by emotions doesn't mean it doesn't make sense. There are reasons why you came to learn the things you've learned. So, you may have a habit that you're trying to change, or you have a fear or an anxiety of a certain sort, or you're dealing with relational problems. And even in the relationship problem, the issue is how you learned implicitly through emotional experiences to be in such a relational dynamic, or to keep yourself in one. So everything that you're facing is something that you have learned at some point. So that means that therapy is about relearning. And as I often tell my clients, my job as a therapist is to help you live in reality. What that means is the goal of therapy is to help you notice your implicit learning and your reactions, your urges, your behaviors, your automatic thoughts, and update them to better align with reality. So some of the things you've learned throughout life, particularly in childhood, made sense for your experiences in childhood. But if you really think about it, there probably have been some drawbacks, at least in adulthood, to continue to live by those old templates that you picked up on or that you were conditioned into in childhood. Okay? And if you can identify those drawbacks, then you can realize, I need to update these schemas, these templates that I've been living off of, that have been running automatically, on autopilot, basically, unconsciously in the background of my mind and my behaviors, dictating my choices. So to edit those, to relearn those templates, we need to gain insight into them. to realize that they are underlying dynamics. You need to bring them up. You need to make those unconscious dynamics conscious. And then heal, to bring into right order those dynamics, or simply learn something new. Because maybe it's not so much that they're broken, but maybe they're just not accurate to the life that you're living now as an adult. Maybe you're not in the situation you're in when you're a child, where you needed to be in survival mode all the time. And now you can make a new life for yourself. Maybe there's some new truths that you need to live according to. Or maybe you're living in a bit of a fantasy where you're not facing the reality of the difficulties of your current life and you're thinking everything's going to work out. Either way, facing reality is the goal of therapy, and learning how to live in accordance with reality. So in broad terms, there are a few different methods that we can use for gaining insight and healing of whatever it is we discover underneath your particular challenge you're facing. First, there's inquiry investigation. Now, this is the oldest approach. This is kind of what we all default to. You have a particular struggle, maybe you're anxious about something, and you just inquire, what am I worried about? And you reflect on it, and maybe you arrive at some conclusions. Maybe you actually gain some insight. And so you, maybe with your therapist or a friend or by yourself, you can just inquire about something that you are experiencing that's causing suffering in your life, or that is a hurdle for you to overcome, and you just examine it, you investigate it, maybe through introspection, maybe through asking those who know you well if they have any insight based on what they know about you. And you may arrive at some really good conclusions, and they might be accurate. And this insight could be so profound that it does result in emotional, cognitive, and behavioral change. This approach requires a lot of good insight, the capacity for insight, and having a lot of curiosity. But here's the reality. Most people don't process things this way. We all like to think that we do, like, oh, all I need to do is just ask the question and I'll gain the insights I need. And we oftentimes overestimate our level of insight and our capacity to know ourselves. But the reality is most of us don't learn in this way because we're not as aware of what's unconscious to us. This requires a lot of insight, and simply it's mostly appealing to your cognitive, your rational, conscious mind. So maybe you've already made a lot of progress in your life at making the unconscious conscious. So the inquiry investigation approach may yield a lot of results. But if there's still a lot below the surface for you, like Jung would talk about the unconscious as being like everything below the surface of an iceberg. The iceberg is only the smallest portion that we see above water. The rest is humongous. So that's essentially the unconscious. It's all our emotions, the things we've learned through just simply experience, through conditioning, through whether it's trauma or just repetition. We don't always think about these things in a conscious way, but we know them. So, inquiry investigation can be helpful, can be useful if you have sufficient insight or the capacity for it and you're really curious. But most of us are simply not going to learn things that way. So if we need to get into better touch with our implicit learning, our emotional learning, then we need to get in touch with our bodies, since your emotions are your body's dashboard for your soul. They're felt. There's a reason why we call them feelings. There's something physical, physiological, tangible about emotions, and they communicate great depth of meaning. So therefore, it would be helpful to be in tune with how your body expresses emotions to you. And so when you take a more somatic approach, a body work approach, this is going to be really helpful in gaining insight into your implicit learning, into your schemas. This is going to work best for people who are already in touch with their emotions. But this is also a necessary method for people who haven't really developed much emotional awareness. It's not impossible. You can do it. It's going to take a lot of intention to go into your body and notice, all right, what do I feel physically? What do I notice in my body when I say I have a certain emotion? Well, I say I'm angry. How do I know I'm angry? Well, because I have an angry thought. Okay, but just because you have a thought that seems to be anger coded, it doesn't mean you actually feel the anger. Go into your body when you have what you assume is an angry thought. What do you notice? See if you can go to actual experiences, memories, where you definitely know you're angry. And see what you notice when you go back to that experience. How does it feel in your body when you remember it really well? There, you're going to gain some more insight. So you get more familiarity with your emotions and how they're expressed in your body. Now, for some of us, we feel our emotions really intensely. And to go on that sort of exploration can be daunting and maybe even detrimental, maybe even dangerous. And so there are ways of processing our memories that can actually bypass the emotions so we don't have to feel them as intensely. And this is where things like different trauma-informed and trauma reprocessing approaches really help. Like Flash, for example, or EMDR. Flash especially because it requires not even focusing on the memory that you're trying to heal from. It puts it off to the side for a little bit, so you barely are even touching on it. Whereas with EMDR, you're focusing on it the whole time, but you're doing it in a way where it's tolerable enough. You're within a window of tolerance. These sort of reprocessing techniques are really helpful for people who are aware of their key memories, whether it's a trauma memory or an addiction memory, something that's related to the behavior that they want to stop but has positive feelings associated with it. And what's good about some of these trauma or memory reprocessing approaches is that insight may not be as needed in order to experience the benefits. At least the experience of making the unconscious super conscious so you can really know, well, what was the emotion, what was the core belief in the emotion, may not be as necessary when you use some of these approaches. Such as a brief overview of some of the major techniques that you might find in therapy, at least with me. Now, to even make relearning possible, you have to get back into learning mode. That's assuming I'm working with an adult. With children, they're already in learning mode to some degree. Adolescents, less so. They're already consolidating what they've learned. But with children, we're going to need to have the family involved, really, to make it the most helpful, unless the family is so dangerous and toxic that we just need to help the child in a trauma-informed way until they're able to be a little more free of that environment, and then they can go back and process what they were experiencing for years. But primarily I work with adults, and so they're no longer in the learning mode that they were in when they were children. See, in childhood, we're taking in our experiences and we're learning things implicitly through conditioning, through repetition and emotion, or trauma, or really significant events. And therefore, we're creating templates, schemas, that we can then use to predict what to expect for the rest of our lives. And as childhood ends, our learning, or memory, consolidates. Because you can't stay in learning mode forever. It takes up too much energy in it and attention. So we don't stay in active learning mode going into adulthood. We need these basic templates and schemas in order to navigate life without constantly approaching every situation like it's brand new. No, you need to have some basic predictions about what to expect. And then an idea of, well, what's the best way to respond to each situation? That's what we learn in childhood. So many aspects of childhood do this. For example, girls love to play house. They love to have a baby doll that they imagine themselves nurturing and taking care of. What they're doing is, just like Piaget taught, they're taking something concrete and then it becomes integrated into them. They're learning way before they ever need it. When they'll need it as an adult, they're learning at an implicit level what they'll need later. So we've referred to this as motherly instincts, but those instincts were ingrained in them in those earlier years. Boys, maybe we might not need it as much as we think we will need it, but we learn to fight, to go to war. We love to play soldier or cops and robbers, and we're the heroes. And so that might not directly translate in adulthood into something we're going to do, but we are learning some lessons about how to compete, how to be heroic. There is some lesson that we're ingraining in ourselves as we do that sort of play. So, now you're in adulthood, and maybe some of the things you've learned through conditioning, through experience, are no longer viable, or maybe they just need some updating, some tweaking. So perhaps in childhood, you learned that when you're asked about something you did, it meant you're going to get in trouble, you're going to be punished in some way. And perhaps one of the ways you learn to respond to that reaped the most benefit for you, or at least the most immediate benefit, was to lie, to not share the truth about what you're being asked about, to keep things private, to keep things secret, to get people off your tracks. And so that became your schema, your mode of operating, to keep people off your scent, to protect yourself. Okay. And that might have made sense given whatever your situation was in childhood. Maybe it really was dangerous for you to share when you had a certain emotion or a thought, or maybe you made a mistake, or maybe you committed some sort of sin, you broke the rules in some way, and it would have been disastrous. It would have been torment or torture in your scenario to reveal the truth. Maybe you would have been punished so severely that you learned it's never safe for me to share a wrongdoing I've committed. And so it makes sense that you would lie or hide what you've done. But perhaps now in adulthood you're realizing there's some negative consequences to this. There's some drawbacks. This isn't working for me. Maybe I'm having difficulty connecting at a sincere level with other people, like a significant other. You're trying to form an intimate bond, but you keep certain things hidden, and it's causing you some major problems. So now the thing that helped protect you in the past is now causing you more difficulties. And maybe it caused you difficulties in childhood as well, but at that time, those difficulties outweighed the other difficulties from telling the truth. But now it's starting to go the other way around. And so you're starting to rethink this old pattern. So we need to get back into a learning mode where we can re-evaluate the old learning that we were conditioned into at a younger age. So that's just an example of what we're talking about when I talk about implicit learning and how it could have an impact the rest of your life. Whatever it is for you, take that into consideration and think about how you want to address that in your counseling. So, to get the most out of your therapy, here are some tips. 1. Come to therapy with goals. I don't just mean at your initial evaluation where you share why you're coming to therapy and what you want to get out of it, even though, yes, that is important. And sometimes we work with clients and they don't even know what their goals are for that first visit, for the whole reason why they're coming into counseling. So it's going to be important to identify what it is that you want. What are you even coming to counseling for? And think about, well, what would my life be like if I met my goal? What would be the tangible manifestation of that? Like, what would be the things I'm doing that I don't do much anymore, or currently, or at all? What would be the things I would not be doing if I met my goals? What would I be thinking and feeling? How would my life be different? So consider that. If you're going to come to counseling, come with intention. But it don't just mean for your initial evaluation, but rather each session. Come with a challenge or a goal that you want to work on. And think of a particular example of whatever that dynamic is that you want to address. It might be an area of your life that's causing you some suffering, uh, something that is the behavior you're trying to change, a certain emotion that you experience that you really want to get to the bottom of it and maybe find healing for that emotion. So identify that before the session. Yes, I know a lot of times life is busy and you just sort of penciled in your therapy appointment or you scheduled it between a whole bunch of other things and you're not even thinking about your therapy session until it's actually time. Well, unfortunately, that's really going to get in the way of the therapy session itself. If you just show up and you're like, okay, I don't know what we're going to work on, and you're expecting the therapist to tell you what you're going to work on, that's not how this works, okay? Your therapy goals are determined collaboratively. So you come in with your goals, and the therapist lets you know based on their expertise, their training, and even their value systems, what they can actually assist you with. And that way you can determine for yourself, you can have informed consent about if you want to proceed with that particular therapist. And then the therapist might, make some suggestions. Maybe your goals were a little too lofty or not realistic or maybe not very well defined. And so maybe the first couple of sessions will be the two of you negotiating the goals. So you arrive at goals that are more realistic and worthwhile pursuing. But then even after that, your responsibility each session is to come with a challenge, a goal in mind for that particular session. So that means you might have to spend some time before each session thinking about what do you want to work on that week or that particular session. Like, what is it that I want to get out of this experience? And it doesn't have to be something brand spanking new every time. Go back to your original goals and think, well, which one of my goals do I want to focus on? And say you're coming to see me for sexual addiction issues. Okay, well, I want to work on my pornography addiction. Fair enough. Then come in ready to work on the pornography. And think of, well, what was a time in which I was acting out with pornography, or I was tempted to, whether I gave into it or not, and bring that up so we can actually dive into it. Okay? The way I explain to clients is picture me as a cab driver and you're the passenger. Now, these days people don't use cabs as much, so maybe I'm the Uber driver or the Lyft driver and you're the passenger and you already gave me the destination. Whereas most of the time when you get a cab, I don't know the destination until you get it and you tell me. Which, pet peeve, I can't stand it when you watch movies and someone jumps in a cab and they say, take me home. It's like, I don't know where that is. I need the address. So I'm the cab driver and you're the passenger. You tell me where you want to go for that session, and I will use my training, my skills, my clinical intuition, and I will figure out the best way to get us there. So I'm not leaving it up to you to figure out everything, but just what you want to work on, where you want to go. And that will help us figure out, okay, how can we get there? Now that might mean sometimes we have to take a detour. Like maybe you have a goal that is maybe too lofty for that session, and to get there we need to work on some other things first. I might make that suggestion. That's okay. But at least you're thinking in terms of what your goals are. Okay? Coming to the session with a goal grows your assertiveness. This is very key, especially for my clients who are dealing with some sort of compulsive issue or addictive issue or some sort of insecurity about their gender and their masculinity, such as my clients with unwanted same-sex attraction. See my video on the self-state model for more on this, where we talk about the self-states and the self-state of assertion. That's the sweet spot you want to get into. Well, when I ask you to have a goal each session, that is to help you get into that self-state of assertion. It also makes it so that I'm constantly checking with you to make sure that you're aligned with what you first told me you wanted to work on when you first started therapy with me. I don't ever want to be guilty of coercing a client or imposing goals on them or values on them. So I'm going to be checking in with you frequently to see, is this still what you want to work on? Now, we don't resolve everything in every session. So sometimes we just, okay, let's put a pin on this until next time. So the following session, I'll simply ask you, hey, do you just want to pick up where we left off last time? And if so, great. But maybe something new came up. Maybe it's something more pressing you wanted to address for that particular session. And that always takes precedence, okay? But you have to bring that up. You have to own that. Coming in with goals also keeps us moving and keeps us from getting stagnant in our process, in our progress. Like, if you just come in and all you do is vent every session, and me as a therapist, I'm not stopping you and checking in and be like, hey, whoa, what do you actually want to work on? I don't hold your feet to the fire and say, no. When I ask you what you want to work on and all you do is just go on another rant about how terrible your week was, that's not telling me what you want to work on, okay? If I allow that to go on, then guess what? You're going to just come to therapy, vent, and maybe feel good for a moment that you got some things off your chest. But then you're going to start to resent the process and think, what am I paying this therapist for? I'm not getting anything out of this. My situation isn't getting better. I'm feeling miserable still. So you're not growing. You're not healing. Having a goal keeps that from happening. Now, if I ask you what you want to work on, and your answer is, I don't know, here's a couple tips. Go back to your main reasons for coming to therapy in the first place. Look over your main goals. And if you still are struggling to figure out what you want to work on, maybe ask yourself a few questions. What is it like to not know what you want? And maybe that's really one of your goals, to figure out what you want. How are you showing up the same way in other areas of life where you don't know what you want, when you can't make a decision about anything? How could that habit, perhaps, be impeding you in other areas? Maybe you're just lacking direction and clarity in a lot of different aspects of your life. And perhaps ask yourself, how could your not knowing what to work on be protecting you and maybe keeping the dynamic, the very thing you're coming to therapy for, going? How's it perpetuating it? So this brings us to tip number 2. I know it was long, but that's really important to talk about goals. But when we talk about goals, we need to also talk about resistance. Be prepared for resistance at an unconscious level. Okay? When you have something in your life that you want to change, part of you, usually your conscious, rational mind, wants that change, wants that healing, wants to grow. But another part of you, your unconscious, emotional mind, wants to maintain the status quo. It has an investment in keeping things the way it's used to. Even if it's harmful or self-defeating in certain ways, it's still safer because it feels more familiar. So there's going to be some resistance. There's going to be some back and forth, some tug of war within yourself. You may be aware of that. Most likely, though, you're not. And that's going to impact your therapy process. It might lead to maybe letting yourself forget that you have an appointment and you end up no-showing a session or two. and you don't call ahead to reschedule or to let the therapist know you're going to be traveling that week, and so you don't make it a point to let them know in advance and make other arrangements. Maybe forget to give your credit card information to update it, so you end up not paying for that week and accruing a bit of a balance, and you think, well, maybe they'll forgive it and let it go, and then, you know, I'm not really getting that much out of this, so let me just bounce and not talk to the therapist. I mean, not bring up what I'm experiencing. To work on the resistance, it's not to stuff down those feelings from that emotional part of you, but rather to allow it to have a voice. I know this might be scary, even, because part of you might be thinking, well, if I tell the therapist what I'm feeling, he's going to get hurt, or she's going to get hurt and offended and think I don't really like them. But I think they're nice. I think they're a good person. I don't want to hurt their feelings. Trust me. Well, take a chance at trusting me on this. A good therapist wants to hear how you feel about the therapy process, even about how you experience them as therapists. Maybe that even means telling them some honest things that maybe if you were telling it to a friend would hurt your friend. But sharing honestly with your therapist is going to be the best way to resolve anything that's going to keep you from engaging meaningfully in the therapy process. So share honestly with your therapist about how you're experiencing therapy as a process, but also your therapist, how you're experiencing that person as a therapist. Like perhaps there's some traits they have that maybe you can't even put your finger on it, but there's something about them that bothers you. Maybe there's a way they look at you. Maybe there's a way they answer a question. Maybe there's certain questions they ask you that get under your skin. If you don't address it, it's going to fester until the point where you just say, I give up. I don't want to do this anymore. A well-trained therapist will actually enjoy you sharing some things that might seem mean to other people, to you sharing it. I kind of revel in those moments, like, oh, that's how you feel me. Oh, okay, tell me more. I want to hear it. Like, I want the truth. I can handle it. If you're giving me all this nice stuff and you're just paying me compliments, especially early on in the therapy process, I'm like, you're not telling me everything. Okay, you're just telling me what you think I want to hear. I just want the truth. And I'm also understanding that it takes time for the truth to come out. So I'm not expecting you to be as honest and disclosive early on. I'm okay with disclosure coming in pieces over time, as long as you're doing it though. That's really going to help the whole process. And honestly, when I'm working with clients with immense trauma, I can understand not trusting me. They've been hurt by people who should have been there to help them, whether it's their parents or teachers or friends or past therapists. But the reality is, you don't necessarily need to trust me to gain some benefit from the therapy process. Now, so that resistance, though, can impede and can get in the way, but not always. There might still be some gains you can get, even while still being skeptical about me, as long as you're still willing to do the process and be open to whatever happens. At least open enough. Okay? Tip 3. To get the most out of your therapy, you're going to need to be familiar with your emotions. Emotions are not your enemy. A lot of clients don't understand why we ask them how they feel about certain things or about an experience, or when they express something and they say what they're thinking, we ask them what they feel in relationship to that. And for a lot of clients, they may have a deep implicit learning that exploring emotion is dangerous. You may have grown up in a home where there are some rules, maybe just unspoken rules, such as we don't feel, meaning that when someone has an emotion, or at least one that is viewed as a negative emotion, like sadness or anger or fear, they're told whether by actual words or by other messaging, you're not allowed to feel that feeling, or at least you're not allowed to express that feeling. So we may have gotten the impression that to explore emotions leads to being shamed or punished or rejected. Guys especially learn this early on, that boys don't cry and men don't have real emotions. Maybe anger, uh, but we don't show our emotions. That's not cool. Even joy and enthusiasm. We're taught as young men, especially around middle school age, that if you want to be cool, you don't show your emotions much. You just act real cool about things. You keep it even keeled. You don't get excited. You don't get enthusiastic. That's that's gay. We're we demean showing exuberance. So it's not just negative emotions that can be suppressed, but even uh, expressive positive emotions. But many of us at least grow up getting the message that anger, especially from our parents, where if you're angry about something, it's viewed as being disrespectful to express the anger. So don't you dare yell at me. Don't you ever give me that look. This is what I heard a lot. If I was crying or my brothers were crying, I'll give you something to cry about. Or I'm not raising a bunch of pansies. And so this was the messaging that emotions are not meant to be expressed, or at least sadness or fear, not tolerable. And so you could have a prediction, this may be your schema, that when you have an emotion, it's not good to even feel that feeling, and to express it will definitely lead to a major problem. So this creates that double bind. When you feel something, but if you deal with it, if you address it or express it, you'll make things worse for yourself. And this produces incredible suffering. That double bind experience that we talk about in the self-state model, it builds up the sympathetic nervous system, that fight or flight reaction or fawn reaction, that as it builds up and gets more intense, leads you to a shutdown state of shame and then the gray zone. And so really what you need to learn, or really relearn, is through new experiences that show you that emotions are not dangerous. They're just feelings. And they're not your enemy. God gave us emotions. They're not bad. And some emotions we may have been told are sins, like anger or fear. God's not giving us a spirit of fear, and be anxious about nothing. And we may get this idea, oh, I'm sinning just by feeling fear right now. Or to be anxious, I'm sinning, I'm not trusting God enough. And we need to understand that, no, God gave us these emotions for a reason. You need to learn to listen to them. Emotions are given to you by God to communicate to you what you've come to believe or what you're assessing about the state of your needs, your desires, your boundaries, your values, your worth at a deep level, at an experiential level. And then they motivate you to take action to fulfill your needs, to protect your values, your goals, your boundaries. And next, along these lines of growing familiar with your emotions, you're going to need to learn to distinguish feelings from thoughts. I can't tell you how many times, I'm a bit of a stickler on this, but I can't tell you how many times I'll ask a client what they feel when they're telling me about a situation, and they answer back not with a feeling, but with a thought. Well, I feel like this isn't fair. Okay, there's a thought. Thank you for that thought, that judgment about the situation. But what is the feeling? What's the emotion that comes with that thought that this is not fair? Because that doesn't tell me much. Because the thought of something being unfair could be paired with the emotion of anger or pain, sadness, or fear. There's a whole range of potential emotions that you could be feeling that then informs me of a deeper level of how you're assessing the situation and assessing yourself. And the more you can differentiate thoughts and feelings, the greater insight you can gain. You can get to the real core of what you're really feeling, how you're really assessing something. Tip 4. To get into the learning mode needed to gain insight and heal, we're also going to need to work past certain emotions and judgments about ourselves that impede that process. In particular, shame. If shame is getting in the way of you facing the issue you want to work on, then reducing shame becomes one of your primary goals in therapy. You might not have thought that was one of your goals, but we're going to have to make it one. If you're going to want to be able to make any progress in the other goals you had, like maybe working on your porn struggle. Well, I get plenty of clients who come to me saying they want to work on their sexual addiction or their unwanted same-sex attraction. But if I start asking them, okay, tell me about a time you acted out or a fantasy that you have, and if you start having a strong negative reaction to just discussing it or even just remembering it because you're having so much shame come up, we're not going to be able to work on the sexual addiction or the unwanted same-sex attraction. We're going to need to work on the shame first. Because when we're in shame, we're in an emotional shutdown. We're in a parasympathetic nervous system shutdown state. That means like you got so overwhelmed with negative feelings, with a threat reaction, that your parasympathetic nervous system said, we need to shut everything down. Emergency stop. And you can't learn in that state. You're frozen. So we need to dial things back and learn to self-regulate, to down-regulate from sympathetic nervous system activation so that you can be more curious and learn, identify your thoughts and feelings that are going on in the experience of the behavior that you're trying to change, or the fantasy you're trying to change, or the attraction you're trying to change. You need to get to the point where you can observe it without judgment, without reacting as if you did something wrong just for remembering it. Okay? This is particularly difficult for clients who come from a very religious background, a very conservative religious background. And yet, I'm saying this as a traditional conservative Christian, but yet sometimes some of the easiest clients to work with are the ones who aren't even religious, but they're at least open. Now, ironically, as we do the work, they become more spiritual, and they become more conservative typically. That's one thing I notice. But for some clients, their conservatism is really more an integration of moralism and a fear of being punished for thinking and feeling a certain way, let alone acting a certain way. And so when they start to explore the dynamics they're trying to change, all the fear and the anxiety and the shame rush back in. And we're not going to get anywhere if we don't relax that. Because part of therapy is to get to that place where we can gain the insight, healing, and then that puts you in a place of greater freedom. So then you can make decisions based off your actual values, your true convictions. But the benefit will be that you're free, you're clear of the hindrances that might have been getting in your way. So you can actually become someone who's more virtuous when you're free of the shame and the fear that gets in the way of facing your struggles. Because there's no virtue in doing something good from a place purely of fear. Not fear of God as in like reverence for Him, but a fear that that you'll be in trouble if you do the wrong thing. Like, that tells me you're not doing the good thing for the right reasons. Just as there's no virtue in not doing something bad out of fear or shame. It's when you get to a place you realize, you know what? I could choose to do this or that. but I'm going to choose the good because that's really what is best for me. And that's what honors God, for example. Okay, we're winding down here. Tip number 5 to get the most out of your therapy process. Take notes, but do so after the session or when we're wrapping up and you need to write down some takeaways or homework or instructions that I might give you. But don't take notes while we're doing the work. You want to stay engaged with the process. Okay? I often tell clients to view therapy as a class, and you're the subject. We're going to learn about you. But the way we learn is not through propositions. The best way to learn is experientially, participatory knowing, and perspectival knowing. So doing new things, experiencing new things, gaining new perspectives. So to learn in that way, in a very dynamic way that can really change your implicit learning, you need to be present to the experience. You can't engage it just cognitively. All right? Take notes afterwards to solidify what you've gained, what you've learned, but in the process, be present with me. Allow yourself to enter in. Close your eyes more often. Let yourself feel your feelings, okay? But taking notes is going to be key so that you can follow up. Unfortunately, a lot of times clients don't do that. And will have a breakthrough, an amazing insight, or a revelation, and they don't reflect on it afterwards. And so it's lost to them. I'm thinking, oh, we had a powerful session. This is going to be life-changing the next session, or maybe even months down the road. I'm like, why is this issue coming back up? We had an amazing session where we talked about this already. Oh, I forgot all about that. I don't remember that. You've got to rehearse the things you've learned in the session. Writing them down afterwards is going to be really helpful. So you want to have a journal that you use to take notes after the session so you can record any takeaways, key insights, practical tips I might have given, maybe some instructions or homework, and then you can reflect more on the session. One of my clients I used to work with, I loved working with him. He'd come back each session with like a whole page of notes of his reflections after our previous session. And he just had so many profound insights. And it was just amazing working with him. It was such a journey. You may even want to record your session and maybe ask your therapist to record the video or audio from the session, and you can request those recordings or record them yourself if your therapist is aware of you doing that and your therapist is okay with that. This could be a good way for you to rehearse, review the session, and pick up on things you might have missed before. And then you want to journal before the next session so you can get clarity on what you want to work on, like I mentioned before. And 6, one tip I can give that might be more of a bonus is do things that can supplement the work you're doing. Read books related to the work that you're doing, related to the topics that are coming up, the problems that you're uncovering. Do your research. This is your life. You're paying a therapist to help you with this. It's not going to all come together in the 1 hour you meet with them once a week or once every other week. You've got so much more time outside that session that's going to be spent away from their therapist. You're going to need to do some more work on your own and use the therapy session to touch on things you can't do by yourself. So if you really want to grow and heal, be willing to do the work. Treat your therapy with intention, that this can be something you're devoting yourself to for a period of time in order to really experience and make change in your life. It can't be something you're engaging in passively. So read books, or if you're not really a reader or you're too active to sit down and read, maybe you're too busy, well then listen to audiobooks or watch some good YouTube videos on the subjects you're addressing. Listen to podcasts. Go above and beyond as well than just your own individual study. And get other people in your life involved in your therapy process. Have some friends you talk to. Give them updates about what you're learning in counseling. your wife or your husband, a parent, if you're if you have a good enough relationship with them and they're like a mentor to you, or maybe an actual mentor or an aunt or uncle. Challenge yourself a bit. Go on an experiential weekend, a retreat. I love actually when my clients come to me and they share, I just had an amazing experience. I was at a retreat and God spoke to me in a powerful way. And it's like that is the cause for a breakthrough in their life, not the previous session. I'm not offended. God, you want to speak to them in some powerful way in between our sessions? Great. I ask you to do that all the time. Most of my prayer time for my client at the end of our sessions is, God, please meet them in between. Do your own thing. Continue the work in your own unique way. I'm fine with that. God can do whatever he wants. But I would encourage you to seek out some of those experiences. Being in your self-state of assertion means that you're authentically expressing your thoughts, your feelings, and your desires. And to authentically express a desire means you're going to be the active agent in your life to make it happen. You're not just going to be passive and just be like, I hope I get some friends. Maybe they'll come around, drop out of the sky and land on my my front yard. No. You're in need of friends. You're going to be active in trying to make friends, being a friend to others, taking up the opportunities as they present themselves, but try to make opportunities for yourself. All this helps build an internal locus of control. I'll probably do another video on that by itself, but this is one of the key ingredients for healthy recovery, is knowing that you are the one who decides what you do in your life, not external forces, not things that are outside of your control. You're not a victim. You have the capacity to make changes. And as a therapist, it's my joy to just be an assistant or a guide with you on that journey. So, I hope this helps. Hope this gives you some clarity about how to orient yourself to the therapy process. I look forward to working with you, or hopefully you can take this with you as you work with other therapists. My prayer is that you pursue all that God has for you. So open yourself up to the process. Pursue it. Grab it. Get a hold of it. And if you've learned anything from your own therapy journey, please share in the comment section what has been helpful for you to get the most out of counseling or therapy. And until next time, please know that Jesus loves you freely, fully, faithfully, and fruitfully. Take care.